Hi everyone and welcome to today's webinar. Today's session will be led by Liddie Bone, who works for Disability Rights UK as Project Manager for our Get Yourself Active programme. As mentioned in last week's webinar, Liddie will be taking you through the stages of co-production today, which includes going through each stage of the co-production ladder and what it means. Just to tell you a bit more about us, Disability Rights UK is a user-led pan-disability charity. We exist to build leadership and power amongst disabled people to create a movement for change. Our charitable objectives include breaking the link between disability and poverty and enabling disabled people to achieve independence and control over their own lives. The majority of our staff and trustees also have lived experience of disability. Get Yourself Active is a programme funded by Sport England and led by Disability Rights UK. We work alongside disabled people to lead change in the social care, health and sports sectors in order to improve health and wellbeing outcomes for disabled people. Co-production is a really important part of the work we do, and we are working closely with other disabled people's user-led organisations and the sports sector to embed co-production in practice, ensuring that the sports sector works effectively with disabled people to co-produce solutions to inactivity. The webinar today is just one of the many topics we will be covering over the next couple of months. We will be hosting a number of short webinars once a week, covering a range of important topics, all to do with co-production. The aim of these sessions is to support more organisations in both the sports sector and disability sector to understand the basics of co-production, as well as sharing good practice on effectively embedding co-production in practice. We will also be recording sessions and uploading them onto our website, so feel free to visit our website to view the timetable for the webinars and to watch recorded sessions after they are live. Just to let you know, as this is only a short session, we will not be doing any Q&A. However, feel free to email Liddie if you do have any questions, and we'll get back to you after the session. And I'll post Liddie's email address into the chat shortly. So I'm going to stop talking now and we'll pass over to Liddie to begin the session.
Thank you, Anna, and hi everyone. Welcome to today's webinar. Thanks for joining us on this very hot Wednesday morning. So today I'm going to talk to you all about the ladder of co-production and the different stages that you go through to get towards full co-production. So just to introduce myself, my name's Liddie and I work for Disability Rights UK as the Get Yourself Active project manager. You may have already heard my voice as I've previously been hosting these webinars. However, this week I'm switching roles and I'll be presenting for a bit of a change. So hopefully if you've tuned into previous sessions we have hosted, you'll have a good overview of co-production itself, the history and how it has developed over the years, the principles and values, the benefits and the challenges. If you're watching some of these sessions, you should now probably be starting to think about the work that your organisation is doing and how much of this is true co-production, and perhaps you're thinking of ways you could move towards co-production itself. So the session today should hopefully be beneficial for you, as I'm going to be taking you through the ladder of co-production, or the ladder of participation as it is otherwise known. I'll be taking you through the different stages or steps that many organisations go through within the co-production ladder before they reach true co-production. It's not uncommon for many organisations to be engaging or maybe consulting, but thinking that they're actually co-producing. If you attended last week's webinar, which Anna presented, about the challenges of co-production, this is actually one of the challenges you may face around lack of understanding with what co-production actually is and gaining agreement about this in your organisations around the definition. However, if you learn the steps within the ladder, it can help you to assess where you are in terms of co-production, and you can start to think about how you can move up the ladder itself. So as mentioned in previous webinars we have held, co-production can operate at many levels: strategic, service, design and development, and individual, and it can look different in each scenario. So you may feel that if you can't do co-production well enough, or if you can't reach the top of the ladder straight away, you can't do it at all, and this can sometimes prevent people from even trying. Although co-production is the aim, different levels of the ladder may be appropriate at different times to meet the expectations of different interests. So for example, there may be times when some decisions have to be made which can't be shared with people who access services, and many services can't realistically involve people in the delivery itself. Some organisations also have statutory or political obligations that genuinely can't operate with full co-production, for example, if there's sensitive information involved. However, this doesn't mean you shouldn't be trying to involve people who are using services and trying to work your way up the ladder in any way you can. One way could be to start at the top of the ladder of co-production and talk to people to work out how much a service or a piece of work you're working on can be co-produced. If there are genuine reasons for people not being equal partners in a particular aspect of your work, then you could move down the ladder for that particular aspect. However, you need to be sure to be upfront about it. So here we have the ladder of co-production itself. As you can see, the bottom of the ladder starts with something you do to people where their viewpoints are not taken into consideration at all. As we work up the ladder, the level of involvement begins to increase until we reach true co-production. I'm going to be taking you through each rung of the ladder and use examples so that you can better understand what is meant by each stage. As I'm doing that, you can begin thinking about where your organisation fits, or perhaps where a specific project you are working on fits within the ladder. This can be a really useful exercise to do as a group, as it can help people to have a shared definition of what is meant by each stage. Having a shared vision is an essential starting point to taking part in co-production. A shared understanding of what co-production means is so important, it's part of practice. We might think we're doing it, but actually we have a different understanding and then realise we're all on a different page. You could start thinking about how you could work up the ladder during this session. What capabilities do you need to achieve this? What would you need from your organisation to work at that level? This is only a brief overview of the ladder that I'm going through today, and it is essentially up to you how you decide to work with it. So I'm going to start by talking about coercion. And as I go through the ladder, I'm going to use a simple example to show you the difference between the different steps of the ladder. So in the example I'm using today, I'm going to be talking about a sports organisation that's going through the process of setting up a new activity within their organisation, and they would like to include yoga on their new activity timetable. So keep that example in mind, as I'm going to keep coming back to it throughout the session. So right at the bottom of the ladder, we've got coercion. This is where people who use services are essentially passive recipients. Their views are not considered important and are not taken into consideration at all. In this stage, people could also be persuaded into taking a certain viewpoint or to agree with a certain idea. With the example of the sports organisation setting up a new activity, when they are at the bottom of the ladder, this is where they include the new activity without any consideration about if people like it or not. If they receive negative feedback, they persuade people of the reasons why they should like yoga and don't take their views into consideration at all. And if you watch the history of co-production, this step of the ladder is often how disabled people were treated in the past and what the disability movements fought against. Often people who use services were seen more as needing to have things done to or for them, rather than being involved themselves in developing services or support. You really should be avoiding being at the bottom of the ladder, as there are always ways you can work towards involving people in some way. So moving on up the ladder, we're now at educating. So educating is where people who use services are helped to understand the service design and delivery so that they can gain relevant knowledge about it. However, in this stage, they are still not involved in any way and their views aren't taken into consideration. With the example of the sports organisation setting up a new activity, this may be if they're given a poster or a leaflet explaining the new activity. They're given information but still have no real involvement and their voices aren't being heard, despite perhaps there's people trying to tell organisers that they don't actually like yoga, but they're not actually being listened to. So this step is still in the doing to category, as you can see. I'll just bring the ladder up again. Because in this stage, people who use services do not have any power or influence at all. You are simply telling people what you do, what you as an organisation are doing. So we're going to move up now to informing, which is now in the doing for stage of the ladder, as you can see. So informing is quite similar to educating in that the people responsible for services inform people about the service itself and explain how they work. However, we are moving up the ladder slightly, and this stage also includes telling people what decisions have been made and why. So in my example about the sports organisation, in this stage, it may mean the organisation tells people why they have decided to include yoga on their timetable and uses inclusive communication to spread this message. They tell them that the reason is because of the positive benefits, that they want them to have more choice. The organisation may be doing this for the best interest of the people who use services, hence why we are now in the doing for category. However, people are still not given an active role and their views are still not taken into consideration. They are still not having any influence over the decisions that are being made. The sport, for example, may not be accessible for the people who use their services, but they are still not given the chance to talk about this or to make any changes. And simply because you as an organisation might think something is a good idea, it does not necessarily mean everyone else does. And if you're not sort of listening to what people are telling you, you know, it could end quite badly. So we're now moving on up the ladder again to consultation. So going through the co-production ladder is a really good exercise, as many organisations might think that the consultation stage is actually co-production, when in fact consultation is still in the doing for stage of the ladder. So an example of consultation is if people who use services are being asked to fill in surveys or attend meetings or workshops. For example, neighbourhood forums are a good example of consultation. Consultation is common practice and can be a relatively simple way of capturing a wide range of views. In our practice example, professionals may invite people who use the services to attend a workshop and discuss the introduction of the new activity to find out their views. So let's say, as a result of this workshop, the organisation finds out that many disabled people are struggling to access this new activity that they're thinking of introducing. However, in this stage of consultation, people do not have any real power or influence to affect change. So the organisation might have found out this information, found out that people are struggling to access it, and gathered a variety of feedback. However, if they then don't use this information to sort of change the plans they are making, then the participants in the workshop have not really influenced the service at all. And that's what the consultation stage looks like. So people are attending meetings, but they have no real influence or power. It can sometimes be seen as a bit of a tick box exercise. So moving on to engagement. So compared to the consultation step, people who use services are given more opportunities in this stage to express their views and may be able to influence some decisions, but this depends on what the people responsible for services will allow. So for example, people might be invited to take part in focus groups where some of their views and feedback are used to influence decisions. People are given more involvement in this stage, and this could be because organisations are going into it wanting to be challenged and ready to use this information to change the way their organisation is run. So going back to the example of a sports organisation and the new activity, in this stage, people are invited to a more structured workshop and are given opportunities to provide feedback on the activity. Participants express the fact that yoga is not appropriate for some disabled people unless it is able to be adapted in some way. So in the engagement stage, organisers would then use this information to come up with a plan to adapt the activity, and they then decide to hold a yoga session alongside a seated yoga session, so participants can pick one which is more appropriate for them. You can see in this example that participants are able to influence how the activity is run, and their views are taken into consideration more than the last few steps of the ladder that we've been through. So I'm just bringing the ladder but back up on screen just to give you an idea of the steps that we've been through so far. So the last few steps have been in the doing for stage of the ladder, which involves a more active recognition of what people using services and their wider support networks can offer services themselves. This level might include people who use services or who are seen to be responsible. So it might involve a lot of people who are already involved in some way or already have a voice. The doing for stage of the ladder still fails to address power imbalances. It fails to change relationships between people and professionals, and it fails to involve people in day-to-day delivery activities. It may also fail to involve people whose voices aren't being heard, the groups where you may need to work harder and be more creative in order to engage. And if you watched the session last week, you would have heard Anna talking about some ways you might be able to engage people. So we are now nearing the top of the ladder and have reached co-design. We have now moved into the doing with category, as we are now working in partnership with communities and with people. So co-design is when people who use services are involved in designing services themselves based on their experiences and ideas. They have genuine influence in this stage. The only difference is they have not been involved in seeing it through from the whole time, from beginning to end, as in true co-production. However, as I mentioned earlier, sometimes the delivery aspect may not be possible in some cases. So in the example I used of setting up a new activity, in co-design, people who use services will be involved in the setting up of this new activity and working together with the organisation to decide if it is needed and what the activity is in the first place. People who use services should be asked, what meets your needs? What is your want or need? As opposed to, do you want yoga and how would you like yoga to be delivered, which you saw was the case in the first few steps of the ladder. This means they are all involved in the direction of the services. Think of it as all parties sitting around the table with a blank sheet of paper. Otherwise, people are simply being fed ideas and potentially going along with something, as opposed to truly being listened to and instrumental in shaping services themselves. If we did this, the end result might be, a great yoga session, but that no one goes to and no one actually wanted in the first place because no one actually thought to ask. In the co-design stage, people will have real influence and power over what the activity is, how it is run, when it will take place, and so on. You can see how we have moved on from professionals making decisions for people in the early stages. Now people who use services are seen as equal partners. An example of co-design may also include advisory groups made up of individuals with lived experiences who have genuine involvement and influence over how organisations are run. For example, MENCAP's Voices Council sits along the trustee board to scrutinise and inform decisions. It is made up of people with a learning disability, and the aim is to ensure MENCAP's decisions are representative of their users. However, the council also aims to challenge perceptions and normalise the idea of people with a learning disability being in a position of influence. I think that's a really great example of co-design. So now we've reached the top of the ladder and we're at co-production. So co-production goes one step further than co-design by enabling people to play roles in delivering the services that they have designed. This can take many forms, from peer support and mentoring to running everyday activities or making decisions about how the organisation is run. In the example I've used throughout this session, co-production would include people who use services being involved in co-designing the sessions, and they will also be involved in the delivery of the sessions themselves. For example, they may be trained to deliver some seated yoga exercises. As well as this, they will also be involved in reviewing how the sessions are going and working together with the sports organisation to consider and make any changes that are needed in an ongoing process. So co-production is an equal relationship between people who use services and the people responsible for services. They work together from design to delivery, sharing strategic decision-making about policies, as well as decisions about the way to deliver services themselves. Co-design and co-production at the top of the ladder involve a deeper level of service user involvement that shifts power towards people. These stages require a fundamental change in how professionals work with people, recognising that positive outcomes cannot be delivered effectively to or for people. They can be best achieved with people through equal and reciprocal relationships. These stages involve sharing decision-making power with people. It means that people's voices must be heard, valued, and most importantly, acted upon. As I mentioned earlier, gathering views but not doing anything with this feedback is not co-production. What really matters is that people with assets and capabilities are recognised and nurtured, that people share roles and responsibilities to run the service, and that professionals and service users work together in equal ways, respecting and valuing each other's unique contributions. So our understanding of co-production is informed by the presence of the 6 principles of co-production. And if you've not watched the webinar that we did on the principles of co-production, I'd recommend for you to go on the website and have a look at Evan talking you through them. And it's also informed by how power is balanced between people getting support and the professionals who deliver it. So you should have been able to see, as we've gone up the ladder, that we've moved away from coercion at the bottom, and that power is now being shared more equally between people and professionals as you get closer to the top stages. You may not always be able to reach the top of the ladder. However, if you understand the steps within it, it's really essential in working your way up and knowing where you are and having that shared understanding as well. It is also important to consider that small changes in the way you involve people can result in big improvements, both for your organisation, professionals, and for people who use services. So when I was preparing for this webinar, I came across a really good case study by Castle Supported Living in Lancashire, who help adults with learning disabilities to live independently in their own homes. So this is an organisation who looked at the co-production ladder and found out that actually they were working towards the bottom few rungs of the ladder. But instead of sort of being put off by this and thinking it was too much hard work to reach the top, they actually used this information to find ways to improve and develop. And one way they did this was to rebrand their tenants meetings into quality meetings. And this meant they changed the focus from having a space to sort of, meet other people to actually changing the aim of these sessions to service improvement. So it gave participants an opportunity to share their lived experience of the service and for them to actually identify changes that can help improve the service and make it more effective. So this wasn't a complex change that they made. It didn't really require more funding or any more staff members, but the changes that came from this were actually quite, they were really big changes. So making this change also led to even more changes because people who use services were empowered by having this more choice and more sort of ability to get involved. So this led to sort of changes in policies, changes to recruitment policies, and people who use services were being involved in staff training. So I think this is a really great example of the fact that working alongside people doesn't always have to be a complex process as you might think when you first begin to work in that way. So just to finish off, I wanted to highlight the T ladder, which was co-designed by the National Co-Production Advisory Group. And I think it's a brilliant visual demonstration of the co-production ladder. And if you wanted to go through the ladder with your teams, I think this is a great sort of visual, it has a great visual element to it, which can make it a really good activity to do in your teams. And whatever rung of the ladder you're working on, keep thinking about how you can keep moving up and getting better at co-production. So whilst, as you can see from this session, being at the top is where real change takes place and the best outcomes can be achieved, a ladder does suggest a sense of a journey that progresses. If you remember some of the concepts from the principles of co-production session, that can also help. So remember that everyone is equal and everyone brings knowledge, skills and abilities. You need to value people for their contribution. Remember that diversity is a real asset. A range of people from different backgrounds and experiences will help you to get better information, ideas, and make more well-rounded decisions. And knowledge, power, and decision-making should be shared in a culture of openness. And just to get you thinking at the end of the session, here are a few tips that can help you to move up the ladder. So build on what you have already. See what others are doing and ask for help. Don't be afraid of asking others, what their experiences are, because people are always willing to help. Pull in the skills and interests of everyone involved, and be creative and simply believe in what can happen as you begin to move up the ladder. Thank you everyone for listening, and I hope you enjoyed the session. I'm now going to hand back over to Anna just to finish off.
Thank you, Liddie. That was a really interesting and helpful session. And I'm sure some of you will recognise some of the stages of co-production and already be working your way up the co-production ladder. As Liddie mentioned, this is just an overview of the stages of co-production, and unfortunately we can't cover all the detail in such a short session. But feel free to get in touch if you have any questions about anything in today's webinar, and I've posted Liddie's email address in the chat box. Next week's webinar will take place on Tuesday the 30th of June at 11 o'clock, and we are thrilled to be welcoming Helen Allen from Community Catalysts, who will speak to us about their co-production in practice. So make sure you sign up for that. I'm sure it will be both exciting and helpful for you on your co-production journey. The registration links for the next couple of weeks' webinars are already available on our website, and the next 3 webinars will be delivered by external speakers, which we are absolutely delighted about. Following Community Catalysts, we will have Dance Syndrome presenting a session, so make sure you book on early to avoid being disappointed. We are still looking for organisations that have some examples of good practice in co-production approaches or case studies so that we can demonstrate co-production in practice. If you have any examples that you'd like to share or know of any organisations, please let Liddie know by email. It would be really helpful. Thank you. And finally, when you exit, you should be sent to a page with a quick survey to complete. It should take no more than 2 minutes to complete, and we'd be really grateful as this is going to be useful for developing and rolling out our co-production training in the future. The survey refers to today's webinar only, so please take a moment to complete one each week for the webinar that you've just listened to. Thanks again for taking part, and we hope to see you next week. Bye.